It appears everyone is sick of the current state of female characters in the culture these days, especially women.
The strong female lead has a narrow range of strengths that are defined by how manly they are.
Hollywood just put a wig on toxic masculinity and called it feminism.
Let's be honest, female characters suck.
Snow White doesn't have enough agency in the story, right? She's being rescued by this Prince Charming.
Great, who cares?
I'm sure
No, women, your agency is being questioned. Come on. Sometimes a dude comes around and does save you. So what? How dare we portray men as the saviors in some cases? Anyway, it's so dumb. All of this is so dumb.
South Park officially made this the mainstream normie position now. Blaming the so-called incels simply doesn't work anymore when everyone hates these tropes.
Put another gay diverse woman in it, make it more lame.
And even Disney is catching on after they scrapped the Blade remake movie because it suddenly got a severe case of strong feminitis. But when we discuss the female characters in current Western fiction, especially the iterations in Hollywood, it's mostly, Mary Sue this, girl boss that, give that estrogen some bloody flaws, you bloody hack of a writer. And when it's not oversimplified like that, then it's overly analyzed to the point of hilarity. Like, you see, Mulan defeats toxic masculinity by destroying the mountain as a phallic symbol with another phallic symbol. It's like Phallinception! Though in all seriousness, I think a large part of this debate is due to constantly changing socioeconomic realities, making the old rules of gender dynamics temporarily out of sync with the current reality of urban cosmopolitan wage slavery. Motherhood, sisterhood, and womanhood have little significance in an era where everyone is meant to be nothing more than either a cog in a machine, a corporate product, or a statistic for state bureaucracy to manage. Artificial society needs artificial people after all, which is why the ever-present girl boss is so obviously corporate and manufactured. In the confusion, we get some messed up ideas produced by the entertainment machine, and less than healthy alternative archetypes, being propped up in the media as the new ideal for ladies. Although for me, the ideal female character was never hard to find, especially in games like Skyrim, with plenty of strong yet feminine ladies to interact with. But to me, the best ones were always a Nord, as in NordVPN, this video's sponsor! Because NordVPN is a virtual private network that has threat protection, which shields your devices from malware and trackers, as well as a dark web monitor that notifies you if someone leaks your credentials. NordVPN is also privacy-oriented, which means your internet traffic is encrypted. That way, no one will know if you bought a free-run body pillow, since the only place to get well-rounded female characters these days is by watching anime streaming sites. Which will be easy to do with NordVPN, because if your favorite anime doesn't have the dubbing in your language, just use it to change your location, and voila! Magnifique! But my personal favorite is how NordVPN allows me to bypass geo-block censorship, and I can access important news articles, which allows me to stay informed. And NordVPN even has a password manager, and that way it's even more like Lydia, sworn to carry your burdens. So use my link, nordvpn.com/pilgrimspass, to get the exclusive deal of 4 months extra on a 2-year plan, or a 30-day money-back guarantee. Now back to the video. Throughout media in the last couple of decades, there has usually been two extremes when it comes to depicting female characters in fiction, both of which are quite toxic for audiences, irregardless of gender. The girl boss is a problem now, but really that was mostly in the last decade. People forget the toxic version of the damsel type that dominated the screens in the 2000s. The kind who can't live without her man. Literally, because she'll either get kidnapped so much they'll invent a supervillain insurance company in her honor, or she'll, jump off into the ocean blue. Don't do it, Bella! Your father loves you! Characters like these are usually defined by their classic femininity, and are usually motivated by traditionally feminine goals of the traditional woman, with feminine weaknesses enshrined or exaggerated to a hilarious degree, and as a result, they aren't really a positive portrayal of femininity either. Even when the girl has all the magic powers, she's still always in trouble in a rather annoying way because she's too caught up in a teen angst identity crisis. Like in the Beautiful Creatures books, and she literally can't tell right from wrong without her love interest, who is a mere mortal, but still has the special destiny of being her forever simp and holding her hand throughout life. True love and companionship is real, but love isn't a psychological crutch. It's a journey you go on with the person, not an object of need to cope with your weaknesses, as it often is depicted in a lot of these stories. These female characters are often useless in moments of tension, indecisive and overly dependent on their male figures, which is why she tends to snare unsuspecting dudes into love triangles. Because she's so dependent that one guy isn't enough, she needs several. Characters like these are often defined by their weaknesses as women, but not because it's a patriarchal conspiracy to brainwash them. These stories are mostly written by women for women. No, this is done to appeal to the lowest common denominator, and to make the male love interest even more desirable, which is the whole selling point. This corrupted version of the traditional damsel was so popular because having a super Chad rich guy swooping in to love a woman, even if she never had to work to be special and earn the special guy, is a common fantasy of the average middle-class woman. Please, save me from my crippling college debt, Mr. Richman. However, even if it reached toxic proportions in the 2000s and hit the apex with 50 Shades of Grey, this damsel archetype isn't always bad, just as the strong woman isn't always bad. In fact, they're usually good. When done correctly, she is the fair maiden archetype, sometimes referred to as the princess archetype. But let's call her maiden because she's not always a literal princess in every narrative that she graces. When done right, she's not a caricature of what a 7-year-old boy thinks a woman is after playing as a small, fat Italian plumber. Sure, the maiden is vulnerable, but also extremely powerful in her own way, and her archetype can be a wonderful illustration on the complementary nature of men and women, where they need each other for their strengths and weaknesses. And the maiden or princess, while more passive than her male counterpart, is definitely more important, which is why the man is the one risking his life in such narratives, since he's more expendable, and why the maiden is the center of the narrative, and the male has to go through hell, literally in some cases, to prove worthy of her. A good example of the maiden/princess character done right in a damsel in distress story is Zelda from the Zelda franchise. We all love Zelda! It's even named after her for this very reason. Her and Link often need each other, and Zelda is the key to set the world right through her power and through the inherent importance in her being, while Link is characterized by the grind, and that's how he becomes important. It's not a bad narrative, even if it gets a lot of not entirely undeserved criticism these days. This fairy tale narrative has had a profound cultural reason backed by the biological experience of men and women in harsher times, when raising a family was dangerous. The maiden and her knight was often used to instill young girls with a sense of worth so that she doesn't give herself to any random loser, but someone who works for her. And it also instills young boys with the motivation to not be a loser. This narrative had an extremely valuable purpose back in the day when child mortality was astronomical and death in childbirth was a common occurrence and life was a struggle, and women spent much of their adult life pregnant and needing to be defended because so many of her kids would die before becoming adults. It was a Darwinian advantage to see things this way, through this narrative. And this story archetype might seem less valuable in our era, at least on the surface, but this narrative is still extremely helpful to both genders when done right. But it can be corrupted and pathological when done wrong. The woman can be either overly dependent on the man, psychologically, to insane levels, which isn't healthy for family building, or be overly entitled to the man's effort and demand rich superstars even when they're a bit of a mess themselves. In these weird teen romance fantasies, the man has to be too shiny a knight in armor, too famous, too rich, too good-looking, and unattainable, just to be worthy of some, I don't know, random high school chick with dyspraxia. Oh, I'm so clumsy and quirky, and I can't walk the streets by myself without tripping, and I'm a danger to everyone. It's like, honey, go see a doctor. You know what they say? If you're not a 6-foot-tall, sparkling vampire with a six-pack and a six-figure salary that drives a Volvo, she don't want you. That's why they call me Pilgrim, because I hand out grim red pills. I'm kidding, it's a joke, I'm not part of that. Though I am 6'2" and I have a six-pack. All I need now are 6 figures and I can be your dreamboat ladies. So let's do it. Like and subscribe, let's make it happen. Anyway, this is why both men and women find this mythological narrative oppressive these days, kind of. I'm okay with it, but some guys think it's annoying. For men, it can be like, hold on, so this chick is just chilling in a castle and I have to do all the work? I have to risk my life? How come I'm the expendable one? Hey dragon, kidnap me for a change. I could use some R&R in your luxurious countryside chateau. Well, for women, it can be like, wait, so I'm just a trophy? An inanimate and passive object of reward? Just because the guy did all the grinding, then he gets to grind on me? What's this? Where's my agency? I have dreams, darn it! Let me be the expendable wage slave for once. Over time, all this led to an overcorrection in order to avoid the pitfalls of the maiden archetype. All this brought us to the impossibly competent and totally self-sufficient Mary Sue, and or tough chick, and or girl boss. You know, this female power fantasy, swaggering about in her high horse on the other side of the spectrum, which has been a lot more prevalent in the last decade, completely displacing the damsel type in Western entertainment, leaving her only in the occasional anime. Now, before I whip into the girl boss, I want to state that she isn't an irredeemable archetype at her core. When done right, she's the warrior maiden, like Atalanta in Greek myth, or Mulan from China. Although many guys I know, acquaintances and friends in my circles, are going in the opposite extreme and denouncing any example of warrior women in fiction as subversive or problematic or whatever. But the warrior maiden has actually been an appreciated archetype for millennia. There's nothing new or subversive about her. Even if Hollywood acts like the soy boys in the memes going all to Katniss Everdeen.
I remember when I was doing Hunger Games, nobody had ever put a woman in the lead of an action movie.
The warrior maiden is not an edgy defiance against the patriarchy. Heck, some of the most patriarchal societies in history, like the Athenians, named themselves after idealized war goddesses. Can't get any more girl boss than that. It's misunderstandings like this that makes people often forget that the current girl boss is just the most annoying and least recent iteration of the tough woman trope. It's hilarious to me how everyone seemingly forgot about the dummy mommy craze that really took off in the 2000s. You know, the hyper-sexy, very feminine, yet deadly martial artist chick. She really began with Trinity in The Matrix, and then this trope just exploded into Halle Berry's Catwoman, Elektra, Aeon Flux, Uma Thurman in Kill Bill, Kate Beckinsale in the Underworld films, and of course, the queen of them all, Mila Jovovich in Resident Evil, and that Ultraviolet movie, which is one of the funniest things I've ever seen. The thing about this specific trope, though, and why it also led to the girl boss and not just the damsel type, is because as strong and glorified as the Dami Mommy is, she was designed for a male fantasy, not as a role model for women. They have an undeniable dominatrix vibe going on, and it's adolescent boys who love them the most.
Hot. Black leather. Whip.
Which is why they're called Dami Mommies. Heck, Trinity even walks around in black, glossy leather, I mean, come on. And these characters, though deadly and competent at what they do, were decidedly not masculine. In fact, the whole point was that they were sensual and beautiful femme fatales. Pretty to look at, but dangerous to approach, like a black mamba. This trope isn't modern either. It goes all the way back to the mythological Amazons, which is no wonder why the original Wonder Woman, who is a modern iteration of an Amazon, was all about ropes and getting tied up. Anyway, although this juxtaposition of femininity and deadliness, though interesting from a male perspective, I mean, guys like two things in movies, right? Sex and violence, so this combination is kind of a no-brainer. But most of these female characters were still very terrible as characters, with a few exceptions. Both from a story perspective and a moral one. When done correctly, she is the femme fatale with a heart of gold, which can be interesting and a more profound character type in the hands of a good writer. But as she was portrayed mostly in the 2000s, and it left many women feeling alienated and objectified. This is one of the things that led to at least the physical appearance of the girl boss as we know her now. A lot of the current girl boss characters make it a point to not be pretty, which is the main distinction to the Dami Mommy. So the girl boss wasn't just an overcorrection to the damsel in distress. The uglification of the female warrior character in our decade, by giving them masculine physical features, was a response to this Trinity-originated craze of the 2000s. It was an attempt to give female characters more agency by not having to appeal to a so-called objectifying male sexual fantasy, which is understandable in a way. As a prude myself, I agree with the motive of taking overt sexual nastiness from our fiction, but there's a much better way to do that, which is to appeal to a woman's wholesome gracefulness. A woman's grace is the virtuous side of her allure and her beauty, and it is in fact a source of power unique to women, and it's a shame to lose that in art and entertainment. You're missing out in a positive way of admiring women's beauty on her own terms, which doesn't objectify her, because grace depends on how she carries herself, instead of how desirable she is. It's the more admirable aspect of femininity, and it's also very profitable to capitalize on, so Western companies are just being silly, which is why their stocks are going down. The warrior woman is indeed a more masculine type, and often her stories involve being a woman in a man's world, but still being able to fend for herself and earning the respect of her male comrades. But she still has her femininity, and her femininity often plays a big role in her story. Mulan was motivated by her family and love for her little brother in her original story, and Atalanta decided to marry a guy after he dazzled her with shiny jewelry. I'm not kidding, look it up. The girl boss is a problem because unlike the warrior woman who has a long storytelling tradition, she is instead just a political statement, meant to be either a defiance to former tropes, a way for aging Hollywood executives to compensate for all those coffees they had to get for Spielberg, or ESG social engineering to increase the supply of workers and taxpayers for billionaires and governments. Either way, the girl boss is not her own character, which comes across as really insecure in her need to be dominant and to put the men in their place.
Men will never willingly bow to the weak. a sex.
And they will suffer greatly for it.
I need you to fix his suit.
The suit is literal perfection.
It will be. When it fits a woman.
This kid has got claws.
The girl boss is trapped and desperately trying to escape the shadow of the damsel, which perhaps embodies her own feminine side, that she fears because she mistakenly interpreted femininity as a whole as weakness. But not embracing it as a woman is the true weakness, because there's plenty of strengths in femininity that men don't have, and these girl boss characters rob themselves of the opportunity to take full advantage of those feminine powers. The debacle of Disney's remake of Snow White comes to mind, where they replace the dutiful and diligent cooking and cleaning, compassionate young woman, whose goodness motivates men to war, with a character that appears to be a contentious political activist who wants to bring down the monarchy. Ironically, the cosmopolitan millennial woman, back in my university days, often manifested both these tropes simultaneously, where she'd act all independent and aggressive at one point and then live off takeout because she couldn't cook to save her life. Or she'd ask me for help operating the washing machine. It's hilarious to me how cooking and cleaning is seen as a way to keep a good woman down these days. But those are the two skills you absolutely need to truly be independent. As a dude who mostly lived alone in the last decade, I can say that with absolute confidence. In a way, the girl boss is actually an exaggeration of the self-worth pathology of the damsel, where it's know your worth, but not for the shiniest, most perfect man, because no man is worthy enough. It's all about you, darling, what you want, what you believe. You go, girl, you slay queen. Step on me, mommy. But in reality, when it comes to a truly great female character, it's not about choosing between the passive maiden or the aggressive warrior woman. All the best female characters manifest both these archetypes simultaneously. It's about being well-rounded as a character. And most of all, it's about maturity. All these crappy female character types I listed are terrible because they appeal to people's immaturity and are quite infantilizing. A good female character that can serve as a role model for young girls isn't supposed to be perfect, but just mature. We complain about Hollywood ruining female characters because we know they can do better. It's not rocket science. They have done better. And they still do great. Encanto was a fantastic movie and it came out recently. But Hollywood is trying to cash in on immaturity because it's easier to entertain immature, silly people, regardless of gender. It's easier to impress them. Gaining maturity is called development, as in character development, and the lack thereof is the core of why these terrible female characters are terrible. The teen fantasy damsel wants to remain infantilized and never grow up, always dependent for basic things or massively entitled to the love of supernatural demigods or billionaires. And the girl boss is too eager to prove that she's grown up and doesn't need anyone, but ends up coming across as an angsty teen.
Don't mess with me. This kitty's got claws and I'm not afraid to use them.
Maturity is being reliable when you can be, and not be afraid to rely on others when you must, and not be perfect, but open to improve. Maturity is a universal trait belonging to both men and women, but it manifests itself differently in both cases. A man's maturity equips him first and foremost to overcome challenges or threats, and often values abstract goals, while a woman is more about the bond between people, which is why male-centered stories tend to have a lot of MacGuffins, objects they seek out, or things they must achieve, while female-centered stories tend to be focused on their relationship to another person, and having to fight for, or defend, or care for that person. You can see this divide clearly in YA novels, with male or female characters written by men or women. And that's nothing to be ashamed of. On the contrary, it's just our natures. It's how we complement each other. And that's it for today. Thank you, my patrons. You're all awesome. As are the folks in NordVPN. I recommend you check them out by clicking the link in the description to get the exclusive deal of 4 months extra on a 2-year plan. You have nothing to lose since they offer a 30-day money-back guarantee. And thank you all for listening to my ramblings. Have a good day, my friends.